Will you forgive me if I say a couple of other things first before I answer the question? Because I was listening to the session earlier on, and some points were raised that I might want to very briefly comment on. So, for example, the point about the 7% cap was made. The fact is, tenants can't afford even a 7% rise in their rents. So the difficulty is, and I think this has been referred to by a number of people, that there has been a huge backlog of underinvestment or non-investment in the whole social rented housing sector for more than 40 years. And I'm pleased that Quadio has had positive discussions with the Secretary of State. But the next time you speak to him, Quadio, can you ask him most very firmly to put his money where his mouth is and put in the billions of pounds that are needed in order to be able to produce the results that are needed in the social housing sector. And I just want to mention one or two London Tenants figures that London Tenants Federation has dug out of the Mayor of London's reports. For example, between 2012 and 2022, 23,000 social rented homes were demolished in London. In 2019 to 20, 79% of the homes, the new and additional homes delivered in London, were market homes, and only 2% were social rented. So I think when Tom referred earlier to delivering the new homes that Londoners need, we've got to remember it's not just new homes as such. What's needed is new social rented homes, and the continuing talk about affordable homes doesn't help at all, because we all know that there are whole categories of affordable housing, or what's called affordable housing, that aren't affordable. And just to remind us as well that the last strategic housing market assessment was in 2017. That's what reporters on housing need. And that showed that 47% of all homes built between 2016 and 2041 needed to be social rented, and that 78% of the backlog of unmet housing needs was social rented. So we need a new social housing market assessment, and I'm sure it will come up with even more huge figures than the ones I've just quoted. And the last point I just wanted to make in these sort of introduction remarks is that in your background notes, you mentioned figures of households on waiting lists, and you say that the figures are lower than the peak of 2012. Well, I think that's because they underestimate need. And I'll just give you one example of a way in which they underestimate need. Hackney, where I live, Hackney Council has actually cut its housing waiting list twice since 2012. I'm sure they're not the only council. That's the one I know about. And the way that they've cut the waiting list is by restricting the criteria for eligibility. So there'll be a lot of people who need social rented housing who are not even on the waiting list. I think, can you just take me back to the question, please?
Yes, certainly. You know, you're a really good panel because you're answering all the questions that we've got lined up for you. So, thank you. It was really with Ms. Turnbull about the what are the biggest obstacle to looking to make complaints about the standard of housing, and you must have heard of many of those.
Yeah. I think there are so many problems. First of all, it's already been referred to, these complaints procedures where you're supposed to go through 4 stages and then you go to the Ombudsman. To be honest, in 25 years of being chair of a tenants and residents association, which deals with 4 different landlords, I've not used a complaints procedure once. And we had a meeting of housing association tenants called by London Tenants Federation and the Camden Federation of Housing Association Tenants at the weekend. And that was something that came out there as well. People said the only way they could actually get anything dealt with was by being extremely persistent, by pestering, and by going to the top. Well, it comes to something where you've got to go to the chief executive of a housing association before you can get anything done. But I've experienced that myself personally. So I think that this is a difficulty. I think it's the representative from Islington made a very, very good point when he said we have to go back to having housing officers, named housing officers, for every housing estate, for every group of tenants. So there's a person that the tenants can relate to. Because going to a service centre is really a very dispiriting experience that very often does not get the problem solved. The last point I want to make about this is the importance of having democratic, accountable tenants and residents organisations, because unfortunately, since 2018, when the last London Assembly Housing Committee report came out, we've actually got fewer tenants' federations in London than we had then. We're down to maybe one or two. And those tenants' federations, borough tenants' federations, were a very important place where tenants could meet together from the different tenants and residents associations and discuss their common problems and have a common voice and have common pressure. And the loss of those tenant voices, those democratic representative tenant voices, has been a very, very serious impediment to getting improvements in the social rented housing sector.